Chapter 40. How had these strange creatures survived in the depths of space throughout the eons without any record of their existence? Certainly, the major factions must have encountered them at some point but remained silent. The last verse spoke of the Queen's passing. Had so many congregated here to bear witness? The creature she'd felt dying in space near the Nairobi system must have been traveling here. It seemed safe to assume it was a member of this enigmatic species, although she wouldn't have confirmation until hearing back from the crew of the salvage ship. Only one of the creatures was present during the Cletharian assault on the Wraith planetoid. She'd assumed it was merely some sort of bioship, but these creatures were clearly much more than that. Dozens of the strange creatures had participated in the battle against the Cyberpath, yet none of the more common Cletharian ship designs was represented within the Cletharian armada. There was a surprising amount of variances between the creatures, despite being of the same species. She looked through the translucent spiral shell with wonder as she approached the largest creature within the fleet. It reminded her more of a nautilus than the one in which she was riding. Mechanical devices had been attached to its enormous shell. A dense iridescent carapace had sheathed most of the tentacles, which hung from the front of its shell. The very tips of these appendages were uncovered and rested against the devices, like fingers on the triggers of massive guns. The creature she was riding in drew up to an airlock built into the shell of the massive nautiloid Cletharian. Once the seal was tight, the door opened. Kivaza hesitated briefly before passing through the portal, which sealed behind her as she passed. The floor was lined with hard rounded plates separated by a thin fleshy membrane. The plates shifted slightly as she walked. There were structures linking the floor to the inner layer of the shell, which were reminiscent of both coral and stalactites. Luminescent spheres grew randomly from the floor within the large chamber. Just beyond the reach of the pale, blue light, shadows seemed to flit and writhe. She could sense other minds all around her, yet there wasn't a stray thought among them. She was being observed and analyzed, but as of yet, had not been judged worthy of contact. Kayla was near, but she couldn't isolate her location. In the midst of all the other minds, including that of the nautiloid, there was a profound sorrow that seemed to obfuscate any other thought, desire, or intent. She stood silently before one of the glowing spheres. Kivaza struggled against the oppressive gloom that enveloped the collective. The Cletharian song had ended, and all that was left in its wake was a profound emptiness, a quiet longing, and an unspoken desire. The way the Cletharians felt about the loss of their queen mirrored Kivaza's feelings toward herself, Kayla. Without Kayla, she was just Kivaza, and she longed to reunite her two halves so they could become Kali once again. If Kayla did undergo the soul transference, is this how it would feel? Even with Veshtaka, she'd never known what it was to truly be alone. For all those years within that broken stasis pod, these creatures and the old queen had listened to her song, carrying it to the stars, making it their own. Those verses were woven into the very foundation of their existence, spreading them throughout all of Keralis like a mind virus. She couldn't feel or hear the others back then, but they were there, always with her. Silent partners in her solitude as her mind slowly gave into madness. Had she misjudged the nature of Cletharia? Had they spread her song as a vain attempt to console each other? Was it just their way to fill the emptiness with a voice to guide home those who had become truly lost in the void? Had she somehow become a beacon to them? Maybe she wasn't just a shadow, light within the darkness? She absent-mindedly stroked the hard fleshy surface of the glowing orb, as if to comfort it. The queen had been at the heart of the collective, that much was certain, but she must have had an existence independent from the others. Just like Kali was the union of Kayla and Kivaza, the Cletharian hive mind was the willing union of the queen and the choir that shared in her song. If Kali was analogous to the hive, then who or what would be their Kayla or their Kivaza? Let me show you. Kayla's thoughts reverberated through her like the strings of a harp. Kayla, Kivaza thought in urgent desperation as her consciousness expanded into the vastness of space. Within the creature's shell, the difference between thoughts and words was negligible. She looked out across the stars, a vast network of interconnecting silver threads spread into the distance. Blue pulses of energy flowed outward in a slow, rhythmic manner. It wasn't the strong, steady pulse she had grown accustomed to, but more like a quiet heartbeat in the dark. She could feel Kayla's presence, but couldn't quite locate her. "So, you're bringing me here again," Kivaza snickered. "What's your preoccupation with this visualization?" "It's not mine." A pulse of energy flowed through the web with each of Kayla's words. "It never was. It's clearly a mental construct." "Someone had to make it," Kivaza said. "Who's maintaining it?" "It can't be the Queen." She watched her thoughts flowing outward. The vibration passed through the slender cord that connected her consciousness to her body and then continued along a network of threads connecting her to points unseen. "While the Queen lived, I felt like their song was drawing me in," Kivaza observed, "but it's different now. I thought I was the fly. I was wrong. I spun this web over the course of 40,000 years." The massive cords connected to the Cletharian nautiloid hummed slightly as her thoughts drew near the mighty beast. "They weren't singing for us," Kayla mocked. "That's just hubris. They knew the Queen was dying." Her thoughts were growing weaker by the day, and they knew they'd need someone who could take her place, unifying them, protecting them, guiding them. The resonance passing through the interconnected strands responded to Kayla's mind with a far greater intensity than her own. "The Queen called to us," Kivaza objected. "The Cletharians were involved in our creation because we were part of theirs. How can you call my feelings hubris? You weren't chosen by the collective, merely the Queen," Kayla explained. "It's like when the two of us come into conflict. When we are in agreement. The hive mind is neither the Queen nor the members, but the synergy of all of the participants. The approval of the old Queen is not enough. We need to earn their trust." "The song they sing is mine," Kivaza countered. "The song you sang was never yours," Kayla scoffed. "It was Dvorjan's song first. The Queen remembered his words when they echoed through you." "Why do your thoughts resonate so much more vibrantly than mine?" Kivaza asked. "I was with the Queen when she died," Kayla replied. "Even though I'm a stranger to them, I stayed by her side to comfort her. I've earned a degree of respect from the Weavers, but the Darklings and Clethar refuse to hear my voice." "The what?" Kayla laughed softly. "You'll understand soon enough, but right now I need you to understand the role the Weavers play." "Why not simply tell me?" Kivaza scoffed. The nautiloid responded in verse. "When comes time of truth to pass, words once spoken turn to ash." Its thoughts spread through the vast network of massive cords that connected the creatures and continued through smaller strands that connected them to the weaker consciousnesses within the area. "Is it their words or their nature?" Kayla asked. "Have you figured it out yet? Just tell me," Kivaza demanded. "You refuse to show yourself, and you insist on playing guessing games. I'm starting to wonder who I'm really talking with. This isn't like you. You need to prove to us that you understand," Kayla said forcefully. "You should be used to this treatment." Would Sadakar have accepted mere words? No, Kivaza admitted. He required a demonstration, but he'd at least explain what the lesson is first. "You've seen that my thoughts travel further along the threads," Kayla asked, "but have you considered why?" "All this, just to prove that you're a stronger telepath than I am," Kivaza scoffed. "I thought you were the smart one," Kayla teased. "If each of us thought about cyanide, your thoughts would travel much further than mine, but if we thought about Bruja, our thoughts would travel roughly the same distance if not for the nautiloid." "But if we were to think about Vorshana, my thoughts would travel much further than yours." "Can you tell me why?" "That's easy," Kvaza snickered. It's how strongly you feel about the recipient. Not quite, Kayla replied smugly. Think about Gaurun for a moment. What about him? Kvaza sneered. I meant literally, Kayla scolded, and pay attention this time. Let me go first. Kvaza watched in confusion as Kayla's thoughts passed through the cords connected to the massive nautiloid, then stopped abruptly. Wow, that was even worse than I expected, Kayla laughed. We dislike him equally, even if we have been forced to trust him, Kvaza sneered. Why does that surprise you? Okay, your turn. Kayla insisted. Kvaza focused her thoughts on Gaurun. The blue pulse of energy flowed beyond the huge nautiloid, onward along one of the vast strands toward Hyrule. What have you learned from this? Kayla's question echoed not merely Sadakar's words, but the feeling behind them. She'd assumed the queen was searching for her, drawing her in further each time their minds grew near. Had she been wrong? Gaurun wasn't telepathic, yet she felt the same strange tug pulling her thoughts further. It must be reciprocal, and not merely a matter of some emotional connection as she'd presumed. Gaurun certainly had no great emotional bond with her, but he did value her for his dubious reasons. Knowledge is but the gateway to true understanding, Kayla mimicked Sadakar's accent, then giggled uncontrollably. I can see you now, Kvaza said as she watched Kayla's ethereal form gliding from strand to strand along the vast web that bound each Cletherian consciousness within the collective. You still don't understand, Kayla teased, but it's a start. You're being as cryptic as Labarth, Kvaza grumbled. As she thought of the blind old Lupian, her thoughts moved out across the thick cords, but the response she felt was less of a tug and more of a forceful yank. Her awareness was flung through the depths of space, moving between nautiloid Cletherians far beyond the expanse of the Dew Star Nebula. She watched in confusion as she sped past Pilf, Bahayat, and Quantal, through the dark patch beyond Yakar, and continued toward Kilfan on the far side of the Kryl Nebula. She caught a glimpse of a deep space facility on the edge of the Kaylani Dominion, and then her consciousness recoiled like an elastic pulled taut. Wait, does that mean? Kvaza said in shock. Yes, Kayla said with a smile. Come with me, Kvaza said urgently as she held out her hand to her other self. It's not that easy, Kayla taunted. You have to come to me, and there's still more for you to learn. There will be time for that later, Kvaza insisted. As Kvaza's consciousness was drawn back into her body, she found she was not alone. Several bulky insectal creatures, each with a light brown, thorny carapace, had surrounded her. They stood motionlessly as if they were waiting for something. Kvaza looked around in confusion. These were the same strange creatures that had been present during the cloning process. The shelled insects' wings vibrated visibly. Their heads bobbed rhythmically as verses from the mind of the enormous nautiloid echoed through them. The words were drawn directly from riddled infinity without any alteration. 2 seeds safely hidden away, waiting for another day. Overgrown, all left is mired, our only hope a single child. While she considered if she should respond, the Cletherian creature who had brought her here responded with its song, which bore words from the ancient prophecy but had twisted them into something new. Seek the one whose need is dire, the one to tame the river wild. The secrets of the soul unclear, hurry now a truth to hear. The smaller creature's words seemed unable to reach beyond its enormous cousin to the insects that had surrounded her. She didn't feel threatened by them but made sure her combat empathy was active just as a precaution. She could feel something changing, intangibly, deep within the ancient beast as a modified verse rumbled through its mind. When comes to be revealed, dark and light seeds shall be peeled. Kvaza struggled against her instincts as the insects began tearing off her environmental suit. They were clearly acting in response to the verse. She knew it wasn't meant as an attack. If that had been their intent, her combat empathy would have been triggered, but she didn't much appreciate being disrobed in such an aggressive manner. She hadn't agreed to this, but had neither choice nor a shared language that would allow for dissent. She began to panic as they pulled at her helmet. Trust, Kayla's voice sounded within her mind. They separated the armored sections from the flexible cloth which had held them in place. After they draped the cloth over the top of one of the strange blue spheres of light, they placed her helmet on top of the stack. She watched in confusion as the creatures collected the armor fragments and began to walk away. Where are they going? She wondered aloud. Just follow them, Kayla said with a chuckle. Kayla's voice sounded strange, hollow, and almost sinister. Kivaza slowly turned her head toward where the glowing sphere had been. A pale blue glow was emanating through the glassy faceplate of her helmet, which was floating nearly 6 feet above the floor. A faintly shimmering mist poured downward through the dark remnants of her environmental suit. What do you think? Kayla's voice asked as the ghastly mass of shredded cloth spun around as if it were trying to dance. The bluish vapor trailed behind it in the grim parody of a human form. Are you sure you want me to answer? Kivaza balked. It can't be that bad, Kayla objected. Thalu's cat fetish isn't helping any, Kivaza grumbled as she struggled to ignore the feline features that had been sculpted into the glassy faceplate. Just because I had sex with me, Akko. Kayla began to object. I said Thalu, Kivaza scolded. She bought that helmet, not you. I'll just have to see what I look like for myself, Kayla mused. Sorry, Kivaza quipped, I didn't think to bring a hand mirror. A patch of blue mist floated in front of the helmet, dissipating rapidly. Why did they tear off the armored bits? Kivaza asked. I'm not sure, Kayla said as she moved the auxiliary breathing apparatus inside the helmet to simulate a smile. Let's follow them and find out. The helmeted mass of tattered cloth floated off in the direction of the Clotharian insects. The helmet bobbed up and down as if were riding on unseen waves, as the pieces moving in the place of her arms and legs swung in long exaggerated motions. Are you skipping? Kivaza said irritably. I couldn't help it, Kayla giggled. I just feel so light. Stop that, Kivaza scolded. You look like you trying to dance. The helmet turned to face her as the twisted parody of her body continued forward. That's really not funny. Her dancing was. Watching you is not, Kivaza snickered as she followed behind her. It's just disturbing. Please, just stop. Fine, Kayla grumbled as she began moving more normally, if such a thing was even possible, while assuming such a bizarre form. I take it you're not really looking through the helmet, Kivaza said. No, Kayla said with a hint of confusion in her tone. Why do you ask? Turn the helmet to face the direction you're moving. Sorry, Kayla laughed. I forgot. Isn't it a little disrespectful to be laughing and playing while the Clotharians are mourning? Kivaza asked irritably. You're always so serious, Kayla shot back. If I let them dwell on their sorrow, it could consume them and turn to anger. We don't want that. Other candidates seek to become the new queen. We've already met one. She was so full of rage and hate. As the old queen grew weaker and her song grew fainter, many of the weavers were drawn into the strength of the young queen despite her cruelty. We need to show them there's another path before they're all consumed by her twisted desires. You want us to oppose their new queen? Kivaza asked. Did you forget how that went last time? She's a lot stronger than us. She's a pretender to the throne, Kayla sneered. The old queen chose her successor a long time ago, back when we were created on Farpoint. She desired peace for her children, and hoped we could eventually achieve her goal. I hope she had an alternate in place. Kayla laughed. Like you and me? Kivaza smirked. I gave them my word that we'd continue her work. Kayla seemed proud of herself. You're kidding. This is just too much, Kivaza sighed. What do you mean? We promised Edikoneg that we'd bring his people back to Keralis when the time is right. We vowed to hunt down and kill the people responsible for the attack on the Nadrok colony. Sadakar charged us with the duty of liberating his people from the Johnny curse. We need to defeat the leech that's taken control of Vance. We need to save Hyrule when Midguard returns to the Soral system. Now you want us to defeat a young queen who we're no match for, earn the trust of the Cletharian Collective, and become their new queen? Have you lost your mind? What's next? Why not just promise to overthrow the Lamentic High Court and give the throne to my Tejmare as a wedding present? I know. Let's just conquer and lay waste to all of the old factions and seize the Dvorjon's ancient throne while we're at it. During our ambrosia overdose, I remember saying something about the universe owing us one more miracle. With the exception, maybe, of hunting down and destroying the ship that attacked Nadrok, accomplishing any of those goals in one lifetime would be miraculous. Can we, please, agree to stop promising to perform impossible tasks? The Cletharian insects were dropping the pink-colored armored plates into a small pool filled with a clear foul-smelling liquid. It's too late for that, Kayla said as they watched the armor dissolve. We're already committed. Nice choice of words, Kivaza growled. If we didn't share the same body, I'd have you committed. Kayla giggled. I'm not sure the person who mentioned giving Cyan a wedding ring should be questioning my commitments. I'm still debating whether or not I want my own separate body. I don't think either of us is ready for that, Kivaza sighed. We're not sharing the same body right now, Kayla scoffed. If you want us to go back to being Callie, we'll need to reach an agreement on this. I'm in no rush. Slender pseudopods extended from the walls of the shallow pool and soaked up the dissolved polymer. Kayla followed the course of a nearby extent of flesh which bulged and became discolored as the fluid flowed toward the side of the nautiloid shell. So, you're willing to stay behind, Kivaza scoffed as she followed the twisted form which Kayla wore. Do you expect me to believe you'd throw away all that's held meaning to you? How long can you stay like this? Kayla led her over to a transparent section of the huge nautiloid shell. A thick tendril reached around to where the smaller nautiloid had affixed itself to the ancient creature's shell. It drew the strange limb into its mouth and drank deeply. I take it the Cletharian creature that brought me here is just a baby, Kivaza said. Is the big one feeding it my armor? It's an anomaly, Kayla explained. It was birthed when its mother was crushed by the array. It wasn't ready to be born and shouldn't have survived. Its mother is dead, and they see us as responsible. The Weavers have charged us with raising and protecting the infant. Its mother sacrificed itself to save me, Kivaza said sadly. I'd be willing, under normal circumstances, but I don't know the first thing about it. Does this mean you're done arguing with me? Kayla mocked. Is that all it took? I said, under normal circumstances. Nothing about this is normal. Even if it was realistic, I'd be agreeing to take care of a baby Cletharian nautiloid, Kivaza scoffed, not to rule them. I thought you understood what I was showing you, Kayla said sadly. The Weavers, or nautiloids, if you prefer, are all interconnected. As that child grows, their connection to others will strengthen, and they will learn everything that has been taught and experienced. We can't defeat the false queen with brute force. Haven't you been paying attention? It's like that stupid prophecy says. The ancient nautiloid's consciousness spoke as if to finish Kayla's thought. With each thread she does so, worlds are linked to and fro. Weaving forward each strand cast, linking future to the past. The verses seem to resonate through the shell as the minds of the insectal Cletharians, and even the shadows seem to echo the ancient creature's thoughts. You're not being asked to rule them, Kayla scoffed. The false queen is attempting to force their obedience. We're merely being asked to earn their loyalty. They don't want someone to rule them, merely to guide them when the time is right. So, I'm just being asked to raise an alien child, Kivaza snickered. An infant that's half the size of our shuttle, that I don't know the first thing about. That's all, Kayla affirmed. Does it at least come with a manual? Kivaza quipped. I assume it doesn't live off of a strict diet of high-grade environmental suit armor plates. I wouldn't count on it, Kayla laughed. We were grown in a vat, and we didn't even come with a manual. I hope they realize we don't know the first thing about raising their young, Kivaza said in dismay. They're a completely undocumented species. This isn't something we can even research. That poor creature will die in our care. If we don't at least try, Kayla scolded, it will die. They're solitary creatures, and won't raise the child that isn't their own. Then why is this one feeding the baby? Kivaza asked as she looked through the translucent section of shell. I'm not sure, Kayla admitted, but I suspect this display is for our benefit. Kivaza watched as one of the insectal creatures crawled into the infant weaver's shell and squatted. What is it doing to the baby? She asked in disgust. I'd assume it's laying eggs, Kayla said dismissively. The two species clearly share a symbiotic relationship. If the nautiloids are called weavers, what are the bugs called? Clether, Kivaza replied. The other species that live inside the weaver shells were saved from extinction. There are several different complete alien biomes preserved inside this weaver's shell. So, you're telling me there are different chambers inside here that are essentially nature preserves? Close enough, Kayla said as the glowing sphere within the helmet began lowering slowly. You're shrinking, Kivaza said as the shredded cloth bunched up on the ground and the volume of mist dwindled. We should head to where my consciousness is stored before we wear out our welcome. Kivaza watched the ghastly apparition for a moment, then asked, if your mind is stored somewhere, then what's this floating light I've been talking to? It's just a construct that I'm projecting my mind into, Kayla said. I guess you could say that I'm borrowing the weaver's power. I don't think I could do this without her help, granted I've never tried. I'm really confident we could develop a technique to simulate the effect. The weaver is getting impatient, Kayla said with a sigh. She's incredibly old and wishes to follow the queen beyond the veil. Interesting word choice, Kivaza mused. You sound like you're the child of Elderos. It certainly is a strange age we live in. First, the Johnny passed, and now the Cletharian queen. If we complete our task, Sadakar will stay dead, Koran will be destroyed, Rukuhar and all his clones will be gone. The power vacuum keeps expanding. Eventually, someone's going to fill that gap. I wonder who it will be. The old queen seemed to think we're worthy to fulfill her role. Surely, you're not considering. Why not? Kayla balked. If we don't, someone else will. I can't deal with all this right now. Kivaza grumbled, let's go pay our respects to the queen, collect your consciousness, and get out of here. You say that now, Kayla giggled, you may feel different once you learn about the Hayek. As Kayla's apparition led her from chamber to chamber, deeper into its spiraling shell, the blue glowing nodules in the fleshy walls illuminated as they drew near and dimmed as they passed. Each region within the shell had a different atmosphere, flora, fauna, and inhabitants. An atmospheric bubble floated with them as they maneuvered further and further toward the chamber of the old queen. What exactly was her role? Kivaza asked, and what's a Hayek? Do you have any idea how many species have gone extinct over the history of Keralis? Kayla said, or how many times species have committed genocide against portions of their populations that have developed telepathic abilities? Other knacks too, but when it's telepaths, the collective hears them. The big, scary, legendary, murder horde Cletheria has saved entire species from being killed off. Most of them were telepathic. Some developed mental abilities after living here for a few generations. The Hayek were a nice peaceful species that would have been wiped out during the first race war millions of years ago. There are a few thousand here. Kayla stopped before the opaque, valve-like barrier to the next environmental region. Try not to scare them. As the partition opened, they stepped through into a chamber that was ablaze with a brilliant whirlwind of color flowing around a single massive willow. As Kivaza drew closer, the source of the movement became clearer. The beings here flitted around like butterflies, occasionally landing. They stood 4 feet tall with brilliantly colored wings, which left a fine trail of colored dust as they flew by. These are the last of the Hayek species, Kayla said excitedly. I wish we could stay and watch them for a while, but strong emotions cause them physical pain. This weaver intends to find them a new home on her way to the final resting place for herself and the Queen's remains. The weavers are part of the collective, but their existence is separate as well. This one is the oldest and lands sometimes to let the Hayek dance and play. They're eternal children to her. There are only about 1,000 in total, and they all live here. They rushed to the next chamber to prevent causing harm to the frail insects. This area was like walking through the inside of a metal ship, maintained by dozens of species whose names and existence had been long forgotten by the inhabitants of Keralis. When the Queen first came across the weavers, they had no way to defend themselves. We're walking through one of those cannons they built into the exterior of the shell. The Queen's chamber isn't far from here, but there's one more area you need to see before we go there. It has to be before we're reunited, Kayla said. Why? Kivaza asked apprehensively. Kayla walked up to a hatch at the bottommost part of the ship-like segment and directed one of the workers to unseal it. A noseless, smooth-skinned, 3-legged, hairless creature seemed to be laughing as it reached down and opened it. Kivaza staggered backward, overcome by the foul stench that flowed out of the narrow chamber. A fleshy ramp led down to broad tubes, which compressed slowly, pushing a glittering blackened mass through the semi-transparent structures. The universe's best-kept secret. Some people claim it's congealed dark matter, others insist it's residue from the formation of the universe. The Black Church bakes it into the bricks that they make their buildings from and use it to make gemstone earrings. Thalu was taught if there wasn't enough in your bloodstream, your knacks won't work. Kayla laughed uncontrollably. That's where Mystrium comes from. It's just shit. Crystallized space whale shit. Just close it, Kivaza gagged and retched. You could have just told me. They say the proof is in the pudding. Kivaza vomited uncontrollably until the hatch was resealed. They climbed up through the weapon system until they reached the old Queen's chamber. The final chamber, at the centermost point of the spiraling shell, was the smallest and strangest by far. It was a 12-sided structure, each side was roughly pentagonal. The calcified crystal lattice of the shell partially coated some of the inner walls. Others were made of a hardened fleshy substance. Fist-sized, glowing spheres lined the room wherever the faces of the dodecahedron met. The light within was dimming gradually. A glassy sphere, which was less than a foot across, floated in the center of the room, illuminated by the ghostly light. The corpse of a small, fairly unremarkable, spider lay in the center of an intricate web inside the container. Kivaza leaned forward and studied the tiny insect's markings. It had a round white ring on the top of its head. At the bottom of the loop, a white stripe ran down to the tip of its abdomen. Cream-colored markings branched off from the white stripe, extending to the first joint of each of its 8 legs. I was pretty surprised too, Kayla said softly. All that psionic force was emanating from her. It's hard to accept, isn't it? One of the most powerful and ancient beings that's ever existed, and her body is no bigger than the tip of our thumb. A little larger with her legs extended, but as she is now. Kivaza smiled. That tiny little thing could bring entire empires to their knees. All that fear, and this was our galactic scapegoat throughout the ages. It's amazing. How much of her power was her own, and how much was from the nautiloid? I can't answer that. Kayla's strange, tattered, form shrugged. How much of Callie's power is from me, and how much is from you? I think it's the same, in a way. Some things are best expressed through analogy. If you look at the nautiloid as our skull, holding the consciousnesses of the queen and the weaver itself, which one is in control, and which is working in the shadows? Together, they are the will that guides the collective. I know it's complicated, but so are we. So, Kivaza wondered, what happens now? Who is the new queen? You, me, Callie? I don't understand. Then stop trying, Kayla laughed. Throughout the ages, how many people have tried to understand your song? Prophets fall to 1 from 3, right? That one line has led to breeding programs, cloning experiments, and entire empires merging all to try and create the one spoken of. Who or what is it? It's like the Mystrium. People put so much importance in it, but we know the truth. Even after it's solidified, it's still just a lump of shit. Your song became the closest thing the collective has to a shared language. Shift the order, replace a word, and it can mean whatever you need it to. The rhythm is all that matters. The "when the last guardian stands alone" verse isn't connected to the new tree planted and guardian made lines, Kivaza asked. Okay, Kayla sighed. Here's an example. Take the friendship's greed brings friendship's need verse. If you apply it to when you met Cyan at the ruins, what's it talking about? Cyan needed to know about Corin, and I wanted her, or maybe she wanted me, and I needed someone I could trust, or... A lot of possible interpretations, Kayla interrupted. Now, apply that same verse to my visit to the club. You were greedy for dick and they needed your help, Kivaza teased. Take me out of the scenario and try again, Kayla insisted. Let me think, Kivaza said. All 3 of you were greedy for Syntholo's attention, but Nelfree needed to have some fun for a change? They all work, Kayla said slyly. The words represent anything you want them to, but have no real meaning of their own. Don't get me wrong, there is a power to the words, but it's not in their meaning, but in their versatility. Are you ready to leave yet? Kivaza grumbled. The lights in the walls dimmed as the hazy mist of Kayla's psionic emanation flowed into her.